Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Meehan, and for your remote assignment this week, you will be completing an activity called Once Upon a Graph. The objectives for this activity are to review the skills and knowledge needed to create successful graphs, explain the story or the conclusion that is told by a graph, and to create a graph that tells a story. A good graph tells a story. It arranges and displays data in a way that communicates a trend, a distinction, or a notable pattern. Graphs clarify and communicate efficiently. An effective graph can quickly reveal the bottom line or the conclusion of an experiment in a way words could not. But not all graphs are created equal. Because of their design, some graphs communicate more information or more interesting information than others. There are many types of graphs, and the most frequently used ones in biology are line graphs and bar graphs. Today, you will be exploring both types of graphs to tell a story. To quickly review, a bar graph is used to show a comparison between groups of data. This takes the form of bars. A line graph is used to track or show changes over time, and the data points are connected to form a line. The axes are also an important part of a graph. The x-axis is the horizontal axis. This is where the independent variable goes. The independent variable influences the dependent variable. So whenever the independent variable changes, it results in changes in the dependent variable. The y-axis is the vertical axis. This is where the dependent variable goes. The dependent variable changes based on the independent variable. I'll show you some examples in a little bit. Titles and labels are also a very important part of graphs. The title of the graph should be descriptive and explain the relationship between the independent and dependent variables. So what you have on your x and y axis should also be stated in the title. The x and y axes should also be labeled, including units. For example, meters or seconds. Let's look at a couple examples of graphs that tell stories from The Lion King. In this line graph, the title is The Distance Timon and Pumbaa Travel While Dancing to Hakuna Matata When Spending a Certain Number of Hours in the Jungle per Day. You'll notice that this is a descriptive title, and you'll also see the independent and dependent variables present. The independent variable in this graph on the x-axis is the amount of time Timon and Pumbaa spend in the jungle. It also notes that the units are measured in hours. The dependent variable along the y-axis is kilometers traveled while dancing to Hakuna Matata. So again, the units are noted, and that is the dependent variable because the distance that they travel depends on how much time goes by. With a line graph, your independent variable will very often be time, since a line graph is usually used to show change over time. What is an example story that you could tell based on looking at this graph? An example story that you could tell is that the longer Timon and Pumbaa spend in the jungle, so the more hours that they spend in the jungle, the further they travel while singing Hakuna Matata. Here's an example bar graph. The title is The Amount of Hours the Hyenas Spend Laughing Based on How Many Times They Chase Zazu or Simba a Day. Again, a descriptive title, and the independent and dependent variables are present. The independent variable on the x-axis is the number of times the hyenas chase someone. This influences the dependent variable on the y-axis, which is the number of hours spent laughing. So the number of hours the hyenas spend laughing depends on the number of times they chase someone. You'll notice that in this bar graph, you can actually plot more than one data source. In this case, you have data collected from chasing Simba and data collected from chasing Zazu. You can show these together on one graph by using a key and a color code or pattern. Simba is in red, Zazu is in blue. What is an example story that could be told by looking at this graph? An example story that could be told from this graph is that the hyenas laugh a lot more when they're chasing Zazu compared to Simba. What this means, possibly, is that they have a lot more fun chasing Zazu than they do chasing Simba. For your assignment, you will create a graph that tells a story of your choice. You can tell the story of your favorite movie, a book, something from your life. You can create your own. For example, maybe a graph that tells a story from a performance that you gave, or maybe a story that tells something about a season for whatever sport you're involved in, maybe your personal best times over a season if you run cross country, let's say, or something from a football game. Maybe you have a favorite video game and you want to tell a story based on that. You can really choose anything you want that you're interested in. Your data is fictitious, so please note you do not need to do research and find actual data or numbers to use. Your focus is to just come up with a story to tell based on something you're interested in and to show that through a graph. Just keep in mind that whatever you come up with needs to be represented as a number, something that is quantified or measurable. Remember the components of a good graph: the title, the independent and dependent variable, which should be on the X or Y axis. Your scale should be appropriate for the graph. Make sure you have your axes labels. Make sure you are making either a bar graph or a line graph. Those are the only two options. Make sure that your graph is neat. You can use some creativity if you want, but you're mainly being graded on accuracy, so don't worry too much about that. And then also include a brief written description of at least 2 sentences that tells a story or a conclusion from your graph. A couple resources to help you out. There is a planning sheet to help you get started. This is attached to the assignment on Google Classroom. But just to show you what it looks like, this is not what you're turning in. This is just something to help you plan your graph so that you hopefully meet all of the components that you'll be graded on. So this helps you plan your graph. There's even a space if you want to sketch a graph, if you print this out or however you want to do that. But this is not what you're turning in. This is just to make sure that you make your graph with everything that should be included in order to get the best grade. In terms of how to make your graph, if you know how to make one digitally, you can do that. For example, if you know how to use Google Sheets. But you don't have to do that. If it's easier for you to make your graph by hand, you can certainly do that. Just make sure it is scanned well and then uploaded to the assignment on Google Classroom. There is also a rubric, so make sure you refer to that. The rubric for this assignment, which is 20 points total, is as follows. So the title, in order to get the highest score for a title, make sure that it's creative. It clearly relates to the problem being graphed, including that it includes the dependent and independent variables, and it's at the top of the graph. The axes labels, remember those are also important. So to get a 4, the X and Y axes have a clear, neat label that describe the units used. Independent variables on the X-axis and the dependent variables on the Y-axis. So in case you forget, it is right here on the rubric. The type of graph is appropriate. So remember, you have to make either a line graph or a bar graph. So make sure you chose the right kind. For units, scale, and key, those are also important. So if you have a key or need a key, it should be there. The scale should be appropriate for the graph, so everything is spaced out evenly and properly. And the units are noted. And then also the written description. So if somebody looked at your graph, what is a possible story that it would tell them? It should be clear and of more than 2 sentences. If you have any questions about this assignment, be sure to reach out to me right away. And good luck. I look forward to seeing your graphing stories.